Hi, I'm James Balzer, retired alderman with the City of Chicago, Marine Corps veteran of Vietnam, and we're here to talk about police issues today. This will be a two-part interview with Commander Gene Roy, my friend. How many years on the force, Gene?
33.
Wow. 33 years on the force. He was the commander here in the 9th District when I was an alderman, an elected official here in Chicago. So let's begin. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Semper Fi, Gene.
At this point, Jim, before we get started, I think it's appropriate that we take a moment of silence to respect and honor the memory of Officer Ella French, who was murdered in the line of duty last Saturday night. Not just her, but to all the police officers and first responders across the country that have given their lives to protect us. And we'd also like to add prayers for the speedy recovery of Officer Yanez, who is still in critical condition at the University of Chicago Hospital. May God bless her, may God bless him, and all those brave souls who protect us.
Moment of silence, please. Thank you. Gene, our nation is at a crossroads now. We hear this great surge in crime in our country, in our city. How did we get there? Now, you as a policeman of 33 years on the police force, I know you were the commander here in the 9th District. I know you held other jobs. Could you go over your background just a little bit?
It started off like everybody else in Chicago, working a beat car, worked in the old 13th District, the Wood Street District. I spent some time in the 11th District on the tactical team, worked in narcotics and organized crime. I was a homicide detective, made sergeant, back to patrol, back to the detective division, and then some time in research and development. Made lieutenant. My time was in patrol. I was very active in the CAPS program. I was the CAPS management team leader in the 25th District on the northwest side of the city. I made captain as a watch commander in the 21st District, the old 21st District, and then promoted to the rank of district commander by Superintendent Klein and sent over here with you and good neighbors of Bridgeport here in
The 11th Ward.
2005, and I managed to bring the White Sox home from the series that
You
year.
were the commander here, and I was the alderman. Those are happy times.
Those are happy times. From there, went back to the detective division. Went back to the detective division. I ran the Central Investigation Unit, which was bomb and arson, auto theft, and fugitive unit. Moved over to 51st Street as the area commander of the area central detectives, and then finished up as deputy chief and then chief of detectives before I retired.
Quite a career, and not only you're a good friend, you're a great commander down here, and you're a great police officer. We've seen all these police officers now being assaulted, shot at, murdered, as Officer French, Yanez seriously injured. How did we get here? How did we get this? And it isn't just Chicago now, it's across the United States.
I think it's like every coin has two sides to it. I think the first side is society, what's going on in society, what are the attitudes, outlooks, and mores of society. Mm-hmm. And the other side of that coin is in policing itself, and crime, and policing, and how the police respond to it. So, where do you want me to start?
From the beginning.
From the beginning. You know, Jim, I'm a few years younger than you, but wasn't that far behind you. You and I both came up through the late 60s, the early 70s. You know, the uproar in society caused by the dissension over the Vietnam War and other social factors, and that led to the mores being broken, people, drug use went up, people were not hesitant about expressing their opinions, taking to the streets, and if you look back on the history of Chicago, we talk about riots that happened here in the summer of 2020, going back to Democratic National Convention in 1968, following on with the Weathermen in the 60s, the late 60s, the early 70s, the Black Panther Party, which was actively involved in shooting it out with police officers. We saw that, and you also have, there was a group of separatists who wanted independence for Puerto Rico, and they were actively engaged in bombing buildings here and in New York City. There were a number of buildings bombed.
I interrupt you just so we could go back to the Weathermen so folks understand this. They bombed buildings.
Yes.
You had ROTC buildings bombed, police, the military, so yeah, it was really a bad time.
It was. So you had this upsurge in, instead of protest and dissent being polite, respectful, and measured, it became violent. And when you have one segment of society being violent, what's the rest of society going to do? They're going to become violent too. So, and it really coincides. I think the spike, I've got a number here, 1974, the all-time record number of homicides in Chicago.
Yes.
970 murders.
Right.
970 murders. And it's right on the cusp of that social upheaval. And then things leveled off, they started going down, and then we see again in the past, let's call it 5 years or so, we've seen the social division and the dissent in this country, and again, it has gone from being polite, measured, reasonable, to in your face, I don't care, disrespectful, in some instances, and obviously as we saw last summer, just out violent.
Yeah, burning of cities.
Burning of cities. And when you see one segment of society engaging in that type of antisocial behavior, what's the rest of society doing? They may not go to this level, but hey, I got a beef about this. And I'm not gonna do that stuff, but I'm gonna do this. So that encourages that antisocial behavior. Crime at its very basis is antisocial. It's society turning on itself, or different segments of society turning on other segments of society, the haves, the have-nots, and things of that nature. So that's what breeds it on the societal side. I mean, we could spend all day here talking about economics, housing, so forth and so on. That's a deep dive, but I really think that the one side of the coin is society's mores. You go on from there, and what we see is, we see fractured families, we see children that are being raised by their grandparents. I'm seeing, what I've seen for 20 years now, I'm seeing kids being raised by, back in the day it was Game Boy and Xbox and the video games. Now they're being raised by videos on a telephone, on a cell phone. They're not getting the attention, the nurturing, and the teaching, the mentoring of their parents and their older family members. How do you act? What do you do when you're confronted with somebody you don't like, or somebody that you have a differing opinion about? How do you agree to disagree respectfully? Those social skills are being lost by our dependence upon the electronic devices, the electronic babysitters.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Gene, would you touch on what the video games, the violence in the video game, and how it's pushed into our society now?
As I said, we're seeing, I've seen it for 20 years now, over 20 years, where kids are being raised by these games. Some of them are good, some of them are educational, but for the most part, the violent games, the ones that I'm expressing my concerns about. You can drive a car at 100 miles an hour down a crowded city street, You can shoot people with impunity. You can start buildings on fire. You get points for it. You get rewarded for it. And at the end of the game, you just hit the escape button or the power off button, and that's it. So kids are being conditioned to engage in violence, to engage in unsafe driving practices, to engage in violence, to settle disputes with violence and gunfire, rather than having those lessons, sitting there talking to mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, uncles, aunts. This is how you deal with this stuff. They have no, it's how those lessons, these life lessons are not being passed down to them.
How would you address this? Because I'm sure it would, I mean, if you were a parent, would you keep your kids away from certain games? I think that's very important.
Absolutely. You know, fortunately, when I was raising my kids, they're both adults now and they have their own families and grandkids. My grandkids didn't have those types of games, you know, fortunately. But I see it now, and I just cringe when I see kids playing these games.
And I think, again, you're back to parental responsibility with your children. I mean, I can't tell people what to do. We could suggest, don't buy these games for your children because they could lead to other problems. Is that?
That's it, but people who are buying those games for their kids and their family members are buying them to keep them entertained while they're doing something else. It's the lack of, it's, you know, it's something you can't put your hands around in terms of statistics, but if you've been out there and you're in and out of houses all the time and you're dealing with families all the time, you can see it. You can see the lack of respect, the way kids talk to their parents. You know, there's also other unwritten codes of society. You and I both grew up in Chicago neighborhoods.
Yeah.
What does the street light coming on mean?
Well, it means nighttime. It means get your kids in or around the house.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember that as a kid.
Exactly. All right, the other thing, remember Channel 9 every night at 10:30?
Yeah,
It's curfew time. You know where your children are.
Yeah, that's profound. I mean, that's all lost now.
It is.
That's lost. You'd like it to come back in some way or some form instead of inundated with this news. Or just do something. All of us can work together.
It's the little things like that. It's the curfew enforcement. It's making sure your kids are home. But instead, we have, unfortunately, a generation of parents who've been, well, curfew, oh, that's a pain. I don't think it's fair, so my kids don't have to obey it. Well, see, we live in a society where individuals don't get to choose which laws or ordinances they like and don't like. They can say, I don't like that law, I think it's wrong, but at the end of the day, as long as that law is on the books and it's enforced, they have to respect it, they have to obey it. And you know something? There's another old saying, you know, we have to learn from our elders. There's a reason that our elders put these laws, like the curfew law, on the books way back when in the day. It's to protect children. It's not to harass children, it's to protect children. So we've got these parents and other individuals who have a different viewpoint on social order, and they see it as depriving children of the right to be out and travel during the evening. No good can come to any teenager in Chicago, any other city or town, being out at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. No good can come from it.
Is there a time where crime spikes, certain times of the day, where it's like really bad? Let's say, is it midnight to 2 in the morning? Is it 2 in the morning to 4? Is it 9?
Different crimes occur at different times. For example, let's talk about drug trafficking. Let's talk about selling. What happens is, let's talk about heroin. And the people who are addicted to heroin wait until people in neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, go to work. And now they can walk up and down the street, they can see a nice house and burglarize the house. Burglarize the house, either get cash or get other stuff that they can pawn and trade for cash, and then they go and buy their heroin. And then that'll be late morning, early afternoon, and they're high for the rest of the day, and tomorrow they start the cycle over again. So, you know, Car thefts can happen, a lot of car thefts happen in the daytime. People park their cars in parking lots that are unattended,
Yeah.
they're not guarded.
Or they leave their car with the engine running.
Leave
the keys in it, which to me is foolish. You should never ever do that.
No, you shouldn't do that. Now, you know, we're seeing a lot of carjackings. The carjackers are out looking, they're gonna work when the most traffic is, where they can have their choice of a car. They're looking for specific
Yeah,
cars.
I believe
And they target certain areas too. For example, the near north side. You know, there's a lot of people down there that are driving high-end cars, and it's a lucrative area.
So
It's a
crime-
target-rich environment, as
So
we'll say.
crime could happen at any time.
Can happen at any time.
Let's go to, let's talk about this. There's people that saying it's guns, it's the proliferation of guns in this country that are causing the problems. How do you view that?
There needs to be responsible, effective gun control. Illinois has had, for years, in Chicago, have had the most restrictive gun control ordinances, laws in the United States. And you can see it's not having an effect,
Yeah.
that much of an effect on the violence.
They say that, is it straw purchasers? They'll go in and buy a gun in Indiana and sell it to somebody here. You know, they'll buy it in another state where it's easily. What's your opinion on that?
You know, a couple of things about that. The straw purchasers are a real problem. I grant you that. As a matter of fact, the weapon that was used in the murder of Officer French and the shooting of her partner was purchased by a straw purchaser out of Indiana. It's a problem that needs to be attacked. It's a federal violation because it occurs in one state. The gun is purchased in Indiana or some other state. There's any number of states, not singling out Indiana, and then it's transferred to Chicago where it ends up in the hands of, you know, criminals. It's something that needs, but it can't be attacked at the local level. That is a federal crime, and there's investigation that's going to need to be done in wherever the gun was purchased, and it could be halfway across the country. It could be in one of the southern states.
I think one of the things that I've heard people say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. That's one of the big things too. Okay, you got the gun, but yet you got the person that's doing this.
It all goes back to my earlier comments, Jim, about people that do not see any downside to shooting somebody,
Right.
who do not have conflict resolution skills, who instead of sitting down, having a discussion, or maybe even a heated argument and resolving it that way, they resort to violence. They escalate to violence. So that's part of the problem. Again, it starts with the basics. And then the other problem we have is the criminal justice system in Chicago is broken. And we can have an officer go out and make a good, solid, constitutionally sound arrest this morning. And let's say you arrest somebody who's a convicted felon. No convicted felon can possess a firearm.
Yeah.
It's illegal under state law, it's illegal under federal law. Right. And it's a felony. In Chicago, if you want to charge somebody with a felony, you have, other than drugs, you have to get approval from state's attorney's felony review unit. Officers call and say, I want to get felony charges approved against so-and-so, and they've got a bad record, and the felony review unit has the option of saying yay or nay. And sometimes what they'll do is they will say, oh, sounds good, but you know, it's a tough climate out there today, so we want fingerprints off the gun. Well, I'll tell you what, here we have 48 hours to get somebody before a judge after they're arrested. Fingerprints, first of all, you rarely get fingerprints off a firearm for a lot of technical reasons.
This isn't a TV show.
Yeah. This is not a TV show. This is not CSI Miami where Horatio snips off the end of a Q-tip, puts it in the test tube,
Right.
and 5 minutes later
Right.
everything pops up. Then the next thing they'll ask for is they'll ask for DNA. Okay, I want DNA. DNA on murder cases, it takes a year and a half to process. And we have 48 hours. So when we come back and say, I can't there's no fingerprints on the gun. And DNA, you know as well as I do, Mr. State's Attorney, Ms. State's Attorney, it takes 18 months before we get DNA, so I got 48 hours. Well, then we're not gonna charge him.
So this
And this
person
person will be
back on the street
back
again.
on the street.
to
We'll keep
commit-
his gun, but he's back on the street.
He's back on the street.
But worse than that, besides putting this predator, this violent person back out on the street, what have we shown him? We've shown him that the system is weak and ineffective and favors
Yeah.
the criminal rather than society.
Can I interrupt you on something? I've always said this. There's concern, there's a lot of concern about the criminals, but what about the victims of crime? What happens to them?
The-
Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to, a mother that loses a son and so on?
there's a few programs funded by the city. Chicago Survivors is one of them, where families of homicide victims are provided with both long-term, short-term and long-term services, which include helping them file applications for
That's good,
compensation
yeah.
under the Illinois
Yeah.
State Victims Compensation Act. But as far as the more routine thing, how do we get witnesses to court? The state's attorney's office does not
Right.
have an effective victim witness program. So if I'm a detective and I get somebody, we get them in a case, and there's a witness, instead of the state's attorney coming out and sending one of their investigators out to pick up the witnesses and get them to court and get them back home again, I'm expected to come in and take that person to court,
Is that, Gene, is that from lack of funding? Is that, how do you view that? Because I think that's so important.
I think it's two things. It's a lack of funding and it's a lack of interest.
It's a lack of interest.
Yeah,
That's,
the people have been raising the cry about the lack of an effective victim witness program at the state's attorney's office for years, and nothing seems to be done about it.
Tragic.
It is.
It really is, because it lets criminals go free, and the victims keep suffering.
The victims are re-victimized.
Yeah, they're re-victimized. Gene, let's go to CAPS. I know you brought up CAPS. How do you view is the CAPS program? I was involved in CAPS when I was an elected official. I think it's a good thing. But your opinion on that?
CAPS is an excellent program. There is a need for the police department to have a close, effective working relationship with the community.
Yeah.
As Sir Robert Peel said, the police are the community and the community are the police.
Right.
It's been true since London a couple centuries ago. It's still true today. There's got to be that sort of interface. Was it maybe, I could see where some of it was overkill, but you need to have those monthly meetings
Right.
between the community and the officers. You have to have them. You have to have that exchange of information, and it's not a confrontational thing. Most people only see the police when it's an emergency, when something bad has happened. Police are people just like you or me, everybody watching this video. They get up in the morning or get up in the afternoon to go to work, and they have this. They have kids, they have families, they have a house, they have a mortgage to worry about. They're just like everybody else. Excellent program. Again, some things, I would recommend doing it differently. And it also ran into a problem here with generational. The older generation of police didn't understand it, saw it as a threat to their authority, when it really was never a threat to any police officer's authority. It was just a way to treat people like people should be treated.
I'll tell you, Gene, what I learned from CAPS, you can get all this information from the community, and you need the eyes and ears of people in the community. The big thing that I found was with the abandoned buildings, with bad buildings. There's nothing worse than living in a bad building or having bad buildings around you with bad characters in those buildings and landlords who didn't care.
Exactly.
The only thing they understood was the building department coming down on them.
Exactly. That was one of the most successful parts of CAPS in the entire community policing program. Bad people have to live somewhere. Where do bad people live? They live in bad buildings. Or they take a good building and turn it into a bad building. And especially when you're in areas of the city where there's multi-unit dwellings, and you have absentee landlords or maybe even a management company running it, all they care about is getting their check.
Right.
The rent check, and the check doesn't bounce, they're really not gonna be bothered with the day-to-day conditions there. So you need, and those are the types of places where gangbangers live,
Right.
where drug sales take place, or they just become eyesores and they drag down the quality of life in the community. And before CAPS, there was never any coordination between the building department, the elected officials, and the police saying, yeah, this building's a bad building, all the thugs live there, we gotta do something about it. Brought that all together and made it work.
I've always thought it was successful, and as I tell people, when they come down on a bad building, would you wanna live next to this? Would you wanna put your children next to this? Would you want these criminals next to you? Would you want an abandoned building? Oh, I couldn't agree more with Cass. Gene, let's end our discussion here on a very, the issue that's out there today is defunding the police. What's your opinion on that?
Defunding the police is a very dangerous thing. It's a rallying cry for a progressive agenda. I've heard a lot of talk, and you and I were talking about it, where people have suggested that the police be replaced with social workers. And we were talking, there's already been at least one instance of a social worker who responded to a call instead of a police officer and ended up getting killed. Instead of diffusing the situation, it became even worse. Should there be a reevaluation of the types of calls that are handled by the police and handled by medical professionals? Absolutely. Police get a lot of calls for people that are acting erratically, okay? If you're sick, it's not a crime. If you've got some sort of condition, it's not a crime. By sending police there instead of medical people, we as a city government are escalating it to that next step. We're taking a medical situation and making it into a police emergency. We're tying up police resources. The police are not equipped to handle things like that. Paramedics are. Now, there's a huge demand for medical paramedic service in the city of Chicago. As a matter of fact, talk to any fireman, there's not more paramedic runs than there are fire runs in the city. So it'd be a drain on the fire department, but if you have somebody that's a trained medical professional responding and they can see within 30 seconds of evaluation, this person is not a criminal, he's not trying to break into something, or she's not trying to do something, they've got a problem, they need some medication, and they have the equipment, they can get right on the radio and talk to a physician in a hospital and say, we're having a person who exhibits this, and that symptom, what can we do, what should we do, and get a prescription, administer, in some cases administer medication.
You hit a good point, and I know, and I do, you feel the same way I do, and I'll look right at the camera and say this. I am not for defunding the police. I want to be very clear with that. The police should be supported, and they need all the funding that is necessary to protect our city.
I totally agree with you. And another issue that's lost in all this is, this talk of defunding the police demoralizes them. There's another item that demoralizes the police. Right now in Chicago, there's a situation. The police pension is only 23% funded. Fire department pension is even worse, it's only 18% funded. So people who are just hitting their prime as police officers, in a 10 to 15 year range, they're taking a look at this and they're saying, my pension isn't gonna be here, 15 years from now. And that's why I'm here. It's one of the big attractions to the job is the financial package in return for the risk that one assumes. And people, I see it all the time, people are leaving to make lateral transfers to other police departments. We are losing the officers that are in their prime and really on their game, and what are we doing? We're replacing them with newer, younger people, and we're having trouble recruiting now because of some of the onerous restrictions and laws that have been placed on the police.
If my mind serves me correct, it's 13,500 police officers. Am I right?
It's much lower than that right
now. No, but I mean, if you're fully staffed.
Fully funded, yes.
Okay, fully funded. What is it now?
It's down somewhere between 10 and 11.
Wow.
And here's another thing too. for years, the city allowed the rank of detective to dwindle. Let me point out that detectives are the ones who go out to solve crimes, go out to solve the shootings and the murders. Everybody's up in arms about, well, the detectives aren't solving these shootings, they aren't solving the murders. It's because they don't have the manpower they need. New York and LA, both of which have fewer homicides than Chicago, had 14% of their sworn force assigned as detectives or investigators in investigative capacity, so they could work on those things. Chicago was allowed to dwindle to 7%.
Wow.
So that meant, you know, people were just overworked. They didn't have the time or the resources to put into those cases. You know, and you put that on top of the restrictions, the problems with felony review in the criminal justice system. Yeah, our clearance rate isn't what it should be, but it's not because the detectives and the policemen are not out there working. They are working, despite everything.
They are, police officers now have one heck of a job. I mean, it's really rough out there. And I would tell everyone, please support our police, fire, and paramedics. They're out there protecting us.
You know, it's a simple thing. You know, you bump into somebody at Dunkin' Donuts or Burger King or whatever, they're grabbing a bite to eat or a cup of coffee. Say thank you.
Yes.
Stay safe. It's the little things like that that just really make somebody's day.
I tell you, Gene, just how it made me feel as a vet, and I relate this story. As you know, it was turbulent years in the 60s and the 70s, and I got out of the Marine Corps May of 1970, May 22nd to be exact. And you know, you couldn't wear your uniform, you were encouraged not to wear your uniform because you could be assaulted. So I understand all of this, but one thing the one good thing I look at that has stuck with me all these years, I was at 31st and Halstead at a restaurant having a hamburger, you know, by myself. Guy comes up to me, he goes, I heard you were in Vietnam. And right away, I'm automatically defensive, yeah, what about it? He looks and he goes, thank you for your service, welcome home. That meant a lot to me. So whenever I see a police officer, I always tell them, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for protecting us. Thank you for trying to keep our city safe and putting your life on the line for it.
Right.
Gene, this concludes our first, I hope I get a second visit out of you.
And a third.
And a third, you got it. It's been interesting, it's been informative, and I would tell all the listeners out there, please stay tuned. I will get Commander Roy back to talk to us again about what we can do as a society. And make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. And Gene, thank you and God bless you.
God bless you.
All right.
Thank you for your service.